Hello, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ and this is my mid-year book freakout tag. So despite being my third year on BookTube, this is my very first mid-year book freakout tag. So before the prompts, just to set some stats, my Goodreads goal for the year was 175 books, and so far I've read 108, which puts me like 17 books ahead of schedule, so I think I'm doing okay on that front. Okay, let's get to the prompts. So there are 14 prompts for the mid-year book freakout tag, and the first prompt is the best book you've read in 2023. And I do have a problem with the word best because it implies that the book is superior, whereas a favorite just implies that you liked it the most. So because of that, for this prompt, I do have two answers. My favorite book, maybe, but the book that I have enjoyed the most this year, the most bingeable book, just like the rest of non-discernible booktubers, I really did enjoy Fourth Wing. It was incredibly bingeable. It was so much fun to stay up late to read, and the stakes were constantly very high in a way that I found very exciting and not tiresome, and the enemies to lovers romance just hit all of those romantic-y beats. It was just a good time. However, was it the best? I cannot in good conscience say that Fourth Wing was the best book that I have read this year. It's written in that SJM accessible way, which is really just code for simple, easy, and completely face value. And while I would not say that it is full of plot holes, a lot of the world building and context for the consistent peril that our main characters find themselves in don't make a whole lot of credible sense when you look at them a little too closely in the context of the story that they're in. So, was it the best book that I have read this year? No. Was it the most fun I have had reading a book this entire year? Yeah. So to answer this question a little more honestly, with the best book that I have read in 2023, I would say My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This book was so good. This is a campy horror novel that takes place in Charleston in the 80s, and it follows Abby as she watches her best friend Gretchen descend into a full-on possession, like demonic possession, after an LSD trip in the woods. This book is entirely campy, entirely horror, and yet the most sinister parts of the book are actually the undertones, and they are the absolute absurdity and yet very real elements of what religious trauma and purity culture can look like when mixed with sexual assault, and what documented patterns that actually takes in a person. It was so good, and I read it all in one sitting. Number 2, the best sequel you've read so far in 2023. For this answer, I have got to say Cursed Princess Club Volume 2 by LambCat. I read the first installment of this graphic novel in March of this year and absolutely loved it. It is hilarious and so cute, and the illustrations are really just so gorgeous. This book follows Gwen. She's the youngest of the princesses of the Pastel Kingdom, and when her father, the king, betroths all of the princesses to the princes of the Plaid Kingdom, everything was going fine until Gwen overheard the youngest prince, her betrothed, call her ugly. It is true that Gwen does not look anything like her sisters. She does not have like birds and woodland creatures follow her around like one of her sisters. She does not make all of the flowers bloom as she walks by as another one of her sisters. She doesn't cast a blinding cascading light and prisms around her like her brother. She's just kind of a hot mess, and so it's true that she's not super pretty. And so ever since, Gwen has been attending the Cursed Princess Club, which is a group of outcast princesses who all have various and hilarious curses bestowed upon them. And in this book, Gwen works on her self-esteem as she is taught by the Cursed Princess Club what it means to be beautiful on the inside. This book, I cannot stress enough how funny this is. So much of the humor is depicted in the background of these panels and can go unnoticed if you're not paying attention. It's so funny and quippy and fast-paced. Highly recommend this book, and this book series is so funny. Number 3 is a new release that you haven't read, but you want to. I'm really interested in Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Divine Rivals is a fantasy novel by Rebecca Ross that also I heard can feel or read like historical fiction. The whole thing takes place against the backdrop of a war among gods, which also I think kind of feels like World War I. And it follows two journalists who are writing letters back and forth and also potentially rebelling against the war, I think, by doing so. I'm not totally sure, to be honest. I prefer to go into fantasy novels blind. And while I was very close to picking this book up a few days ago, I then learned that the sequel comes out in December, and I cannot go that long in between installments of a book, which is why there are so many series on my shelves and so many first books of series on my shelves behind me that I just can't get into yet until I know that there are more books out, so I can read them all closer together. Number 4 is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And this one is no contest. It is A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. So I am not the kind of person that can read a book series one book at a time and go like a year or even more than that in between installments. Couldn't be me. I absolutely have to be able to binge it. I have to be able to read the next book. I don't know how it was ever done with TV shows back when I was a kid. Don't know, but it can't be me now. I am an all or nothing kind of person, and I have to be able to read the whole thing at once, which is why I have been waiting patiently for literal years for the entire series to come out before I start what I know will become one of my favorite series, which is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I love Caraval. I love it so much. It's one of my favorite series. I think it's so whimsical. It's so colorful. The characters are so much fun. It's such a fun fantasy world to be in, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, you are still rooting for the characters and their stakes. I love it. And I have heard that this series, I mean, it's a spin-off series, and I know that, but I have heard that this series is much more vibes, less plot. And honestly, I'm okay with it because I love the world that Stephanie Garber has already built. I am very much looking forward to this book so that I can just go into a hole for just like a couple of days, and I will not come out until I have read all 3, maybe twice. Number 5 is your biggest disappointment of the year so far. And for this, I have to go with the CRIER'S duology by Kathryn Purdie. It wasn't that I thought that these 2 books were bad or terrible or anything. It was just that I had my hopes so high for them based on everything that I did already know about these books. And the thing is, on a lot of things, this duology really did deliver. The world building and atmosphere and premise of this duology is wicked cool. They are farriers of the undead, and in order to maintain their magical powers, they have to kill their true love when they come of age. So the whole thing has this incredibly dark, gruesome, morbid, tragic vibe to it, and I just eat that shit up with a spoon. But then when you add a plot that has conspiracies and revenge and a pact with the devil and magical objects and like animal familiars, shut up, I'm here for it. I was so excited for this duology, which is why I was so disappointed. And what was disappointing was that these books were all plot and atmosphere. And while the characters absolutely went through very strong character development and very clear character arcs, the characters did not have any chemistry with each other. So that includes both of our protagonists, female protagonists. We had 2 POVs, and one of the protagonists and her enemy love interest. So I was really disappointed in that. If the chemistry and character interactions had been more natural or developed, this might have become a top series for me because it was just so cool and gothic. But as it turns out, they just really felt like they were written completely separately and in a vacuum from each other. And so the whole series for me, it just really fell flat, and I ended up unhauling these, and I was really disappointed to do it. Number 6 is biggest surprise of the year so far. So my biggest surprise of the year is actually Fourth Wing. And that's because on the surface, it actually doesn't sound like something I would be really interested in reading or in picking up. So I really don't enjoy reading dystopia, for example. I've never read The Hunger Games. I've never read Divergent or the one about the maze. They don't appeal to me. They make me really anxious. So to hear so many people compare the premise of Fourth Wing to Divergent was really surprising to me, because I think if I would have heard that before reading it, I might not have picked it up. Secondly, if you could summarize kind of just the main idea of this series into just a few keywords, you would probably say like dragon riders at a military college. And based on those words, I also probably wouldn't have picked it up. The politics in fantasy are usually very hit or miss with me. Sometimes I'm completely obsessed with them, and other times I'm completely disinterested by them. And in this case, in Fourth Wing's case, I found them pretty underdeveloped, but overall interesting. So this book surprised me because based on what it is about technically, I was surprised that I ended up enjoying it as much as I did, and most importantly, I'm really glad I didn't hear any of that before I picked it up, and I only heard dragons and was like, sure. Number 7 is a favorite new author, and for this I have to say Justina Ireland. So Justina Ireland hit my radar back in February when I read her middle grade OPHIE'S Ghosts. Absolutely loved it. OPHIE'S Ghost is about young Ophi who has to flee with her mother from the Jim Crow South in the middle of the night and seek refuge in Philadelphia with some distant relatives. On the night of their escape, Ophi discovers that she can see ghosts. So when she and her mom start working as maids at Daffodil Manor for this wealthy white family, Ophi encounters an entire mansion filled with haunted spirits and dark secrets. This book was so good. Ireland was able to write this middle grade main character in a way where she was both contemporary and plucky while still really drawing out those gothic vibes from the background into the foreground in a way that the gothic vibes felt like they wrapped around Ophi like a cloak. It was just so well done. And all of this was without ever letting you, the reader, really forget why we're here in the first place. This book was so good that it made me immediately want to go add everything else that she has ever written to my TBR and just start immediately. And so the first one up on my TBR by Justina Ireland is called Dread Nation, and it's about, it's a historical fiction YA fantasy, or maybe it's just called historical fantasy YA, whatever. It's about slavery coming to a halt when the dead on Civil War battlegrounds begin to rise and eat their compatriots. Yes. Yes, immediately yes. Number 8 is newest fictional crush. And for this, like every proper pansexual, I have multiple answers. So the first one is Astrid Parker from Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, which is the sequel to Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is quality sapphic rom-coms. You should check them both out. But anyway, Astrid Parker in her book, she's an interior designer, and she has to redesign a local inn for an HGTV-inspired television show, like fixer-up television show. And in the project, she encounters some design rivalry with the project's lead carpenter. So Astrid takes herself extremely seriously, but she's also an icy blonde, and everyone has their type. So there's also Xaden, Daddy Xaden from Fourth Wing, and he's cool in that whole troubled hero kind of way, but I can appreciate that while he makes accommodations for Violet's disability, he doesn't coddle her or prevent her own development, and I thought that that was written and balanced really well in terms of chronic illness and disability rep. Number 9 is newest favorite character. This one was actually pretty easy, and it is Tamaki from OURAN High School Host Club, which is both a manga series and an anime. This series follows Haruhi, who is a girl pretending to be a boy at this very wealthy academy. And during her first week at school, she wanders into Music Room 3 and accidentally breaks a very expensive vase. As it turns out, the room and the vase belongs to the OURAN High School Host Club, which is a social club of 5 extremely wealthy students who just host tea service and picnics for the wealthy girl students at this school. It is all as ridiculous as it sounds, 100%. But anyway, Haruhi has to become a host in order to pay off the debt to the club. And Tamaki is the most dramatic character. He's so ridiculous, and he's super in love. He's head over heels for Haruhi, and everyone knows it. But he is also extremely emotional and has these very mercurial moods, and they're constantly changing, and he's constantly reacting to how other people are reacting to Haruhi. And what I love is that he's literally drawn and illustrated differently depending on his constantly changing and hilarious moods. So his character is constantly making me laugh in both the anime and the manga. Number 10 is a book that made you cry. So I usually don't cry a whole lot in books anyway, but especially not in the last 6 months when my thyroid disorder has like completely turned off all of my hormones. But the last book that did make me cry was Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong from last year. I couldn't even talk about that book without getting emotional. And if you're really desperate, my link is right here where I talk about it. But one book that I think might make others cry, if you're really looking for that, is One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. This book follows 30-year-old Katie right after her mother passes away. Her whole life, Katie's mother, Carol, has been talking about her time at the Amalfi Coast in Italy and how much of an impact it had on her life, and they had been planning this girls' trip forever in order for Carol to really show her what this place really meant to her. But she passed away before they could take the trip. So 6 months after her mother's death, Katie just kind of dips out and leaves her husband behind and goes on the trip alone. And while she's there, she encounters somewhat of a time warp and actually runs into a 30-year-old Carol in the lobby of her hotel. And the two form a very unique friendship. And Katie starts to learn her mother as like a whole person, as a whole woman, outside the role of mom. And it's a very beautiful story. It's not very long. It is emotional, and I highly recommend it. Number 11 is A Book That Made You Happy. Lore Olympus Volume 4. I feel like I have been talking about this book and this book series since the beginning of time. And will I stop? Probably not. This book is so much fun. It is so heartwarming. It's so cozy and it's beautiful. It just makes you so happy. I dare you to read this book without smiling. I dare you. Number 12, your favorite book to movie adaptation you've seen this year. I think the only book to screen adaptation that I've seen this year is my best friend's Exorcism, which is on Netflix, and I liked it. I know that they had to simplify a lot of the nuance of the story in order to make the tone of the movie feel really campy and digestible, and to that end, they really did succeed. So while they did remove a lot of the really meaty and heavy subtext of religious trauma and sexual assault, they dialed up the focus on the friendship itself and the absurdity of their circumstances and the stylized 80s pop culture, which was just really fun to watch with my husband, who also shares my love of stylized 80s pop culture, as he's also a product of 80s pop culture. Number 13 is the most beautiful book you've bought or received this year. I think the prettiest book that I have would have to be Foxglove King by Hannah Witten. I mean, look at that cover. But don't ask me what it's about, because I know that it's not a standalone, which means that I also know that I won't be getting to it anytime soon. And finally, number 14 is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Immediately, this question makes me nervous. So I am not the kind of person that can stick to a TBR. I'm such a mood reader, and my circumstances can change so drastically from week to week and even day to day that I really can't stick to a list. But that said, I did make a plan last year to read an entire series all the way through, or as through as I wanted to, before my 30th birthday on October 1st of this year. And that series is the Anne of Green Gables series by Lucy Maud Montgomery. So I am having an Anne of Green Gables marathon with my besties on my birthday this year. And even though I have these Sullivan classics like television miniseries completely memorized, I have never read the books. And I just finished the first one and just started the second one, Anne of Avonlea, and I have to say, I am so pleasantly surprised. These books are so fun and charming and beautiful and sweet and wholesome in a way that doesn't make me tired, and they're just such a good time. I'm really enjoying it. I don't think I'm going to make it all the way through the series, because the second she has kids, I'm going to be like, I'm out. But so far, I'm really enjoying reading about Anne. So that is my first mid-year book freakout tag. How did I do? But also, what about you? What is one book that you absolutely must get to before the end of this year? And what is one book that I absolutely must get to before the end of the year? Let me know below. And then if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And of course, there's always Instagram. But take care, and as always, happy reading.